My last few videos introduced a new threat to all of you, and this has been difficult for many to comprehend. The main gist of this new privacy threat is that tracking us is no longer solvable by simplistic single solution means. The reason is that big tech has gotten so sophisticated. Like a spy agency, they use signals from various sources to determine an exact truth, and these signals will reveal if you did a bad job of evading them, in which case your privacy approaches will fail. This video will delve into the advanced techniques used by big tech to extract your location even when you're on a VPN, for example. Location is one of the most revealing pieces of data that can be acquired about each of us. With an exact location, big tech can determine your true identity, and with that knowledge, there can be no hiding. The way to know how to beat this is to know exactly what is happening, so stay right there. When you need better search results like those from Google but don't want the Google tracking, check out privacy search engine Startpage.com. It does not collect or share any of your personal data, so you can search anonymously. My company offers a VPN service, Bytes VPN, the Google phones, VPN routers, and now we offer a Braxmail email service. These products are made to protect you from big tech and their tricks to profile us. If you're interested in them, they are on my app, BraxMe, and the link is in the description. There's also a merch store underneath the description on YouTube. I've had this question asked of me all the time. New subscribers who haven't really watched too many of my videos purchase a VPN subscription. This, of course, is a highly necessary thing to do for privacy, but then they expect immediate results. They turn on the VPN and change the country or location, and platforms like YouTube do not appear to recognize a change in location. It's almost like YouTube knows you're trying to trick it, and it ignores you, and you then think the VPN solution is worthless. So we will go deeper into understanding some of these issues. We will first find out how location is actually determined from the device. You will learn what IP addresses have to do with this location tracking. You may be shocked to find out that IP addresses by themselves have nothing to do with location tracking, though it is tied to it. You will learn about something called cross-device tracking and how that ties to a device fingerprint. This connects to the two-factor authentication issue I've been discussing in recent videos. You will learn how the AI interprets all of this into a derived location. If you fail to understand this, your attempts at hiding location will fail. Many people, including those who claim to be privacy experts, don't actually understand the privacy problem. There are actually two pieces of information that you need to be aware of. One is your identity, and two is the data you are revealing on the internet. The issue that is being forgotten, and it is the most important part of the privacy issue, is that we always need to question, does the data being captured reveal an identity? As I said, there are two pieces, identity and data. This is an information pair, and that is important. Remember this rule. Take out identity and the data is useless. Location is one of those pieces of data that point to an identity. It is extra dangerous because by itself it is behavioral data. It is also unique enough to be an identity. Most location tracking tools can find you within 6 ducking feet, and if the location is your house, then your identity can be derived. Someone can easily check public records and discover owners of your property and so on, or compare the address to credit records. Easy. This is even without knowing an exact name. If you appear anywhere on the internet and the same exact location is discovered, it is pretty clear who you are. On big tech servers, you may be initially identified by some identifier like a Google ID or Apple ID, but in the end there will be some way to join that with your real name, especially if you pay with a credit card. So stopping the tracking of location is very, very important, and it is one of the most complex topics in tech privacy. Again, to make it clear, not all tracking is dangerous, but tracking that provides an exact identity is dangerous. This is what you must stop. Your devices have different capabilities for location tracking. Phones have a GPS that you cannot turn off, but you need to understand which apps have access to the GPS location data. Currently, location data collection is restricted by the phone operating system or the OS with user permissions. A third-party platform, for example, like Facebook, can only directly retrieve the GPS location information if permitted by the user. However, an app like Facebook will rely on tricks to get locations indirectly. For example, your photos have location in it. It is part of the photos metadata called EXIF. And since they are captured by a different app, the camera app, you may not realize that when you upload a photo to Facebook, an exact location is also being sent. Now, outside of methods like what Facebook uses, platforms need permissions to extract the location directly. Let me make an important point. On a standard phone, meaning iOS phones and Google Androids, there is no way to stop Google or Apple from retrieving your location at any time. They are exempt from the location permissions. Apple and Google track your location 24/7. They use this to build an alternate location database tool which can be used when the GPS is not available, like indoors. The technique specifically used to build this location database is called Wi-Fi scanning. The phone will scan the Wi-Fi airwaves for Wi-Fi routers and the signal strength of each Wi-Fi router at the current GPS position. Each Wi-Fi router is identified by a serial number called a MAC address. So at any given location indicated by your GPS, your position in space is measured relative to the Wi-Fi routers in your vicinity. And as you can imagine, as you move around, the signal strength of the Wi-Fi routers will change relative to your position. That signal strength is part of the data. The reason this database was built by big tech platforms is that when GPS is not available, your locations can be determined using a secondary technique. And this technique is called Wi-Fi Triangulation. This is basically the reverse of the process for Wi-Fi scanning. Your phone determines the signal strength of the Wi-Fi routers near you. And through some math computation and the known location of each Wi-Fi router, your location can be backwardly determined within 6 feet. They only need 2 Wi-Fi routers to make this location determination. So basically, your location can be tracked both indoors with Wi-Fi triangulation and outdoors with a GPS, or both. Usually, the location chips will switch automatically between these two methods, depending on the environment. Again, nothing stops Google or Apple from collecting this information 24/7 since they made the OS and they need to build the Wi-Fi router location database. They also have access to both the GPS and Wi-Fi triangulation at all times. They use this constant location information to power Find My Phone and Apple AirTags, among other things. Back in the old days, like around 2007, this Wi-Fi router information was gathered by Google and Apple partners, scouring the streets with Google Street View cars and similar vehicles. Now they are using your phones to do the same thing by having your phones do Wi-Fi scanning. Let me sidetrack this a moment to explain the difference with a PC. A PC does not have a GPS, yet your location can still be derived. Based on what I just explained, you will see that computers are tracked using Wi-Fi triangulation only. Computers cannot be used for building the Wi-Fi router location database since that requires a GPS. This should reveal another fact. If a computer does not have a Wi-Fi adapter, then it should be unable to do Wi-Fi triangulation. But all laptops have Wi-Fi, so this would only apply to desktop computers. And just to make it clear, airplane mode does not stop Wi-Fi triangulation. Wi-Fi triangulation is passive and is receive only. So it does not need to emit any Wi-Fi signal to perform this triangulation. However, it does need an internet connection to resolve the Wi-Fi data into location coordinates. So a computer plugged into Ethernet with the Wi-Fi in airplane mode will continue to send Wi-Fi triangulation data all day. Now let's switch to the IP address problem. All apps can collect your IP address. This is not a restricted piece of data requiring permissions. You cannot stop any platform from getting your IP address. IP addresses by themselves can only reveal a rough location of the owner of the IP addresses. This is usually an internet service provider or ISP, so it typically matches the city where you are at. But IP addresses are often bought up by some countries as an investment. The owner of the IP address can appear to be in the Middle East, for example. So don't be shocked if an IP address shows you in a different country, and it can be leased by some other party in a different country, like the US. In general, when an IP address is captured on the internet, it does not necessarily reveal where you are exactly, though it reveals an identity. The reason is that on your home network, your IP address typically does not change for many years. I've had the same DSL IP address for 20 years. It does not take rocket science to figure out that this is a problem. If everything you do on the internet points to the same IP address, then it is a privacy threat because it reveals an identity. It is not a location threat per se, at least not immediately. It does eventually turn into a location threat, and this is another advanced knowledge that most people don't know about. So location and IP addresses are separate identity threats, since individually these two pieces of data can point to specific people. This is true without a real name, mailing address, or phone number. These two data points are the equivalent of a government-issued ID on the internet. The problem is this. If both location and IP address are captured simultaneously, then you can eventually derive one if you don't have the other piece of data. This happens because there are apps like the Weather Channel app and thousands of other apps on phones with access to location data are selling the combination of IP address and location to companies like Skyhook or Here.com. The suspect apps are typically those that require location. A Weather Channel app is a perfect ploy for this. You allow the app to capture your location, which it will know exactly from the GPS and within 6 feet using Wi-Fi triangulation. Then it captures your current IP address. So if you happen to be running some of these apps, your IP address and location data is captured, and then data is sold to these reverse IP lookup database companies. This is used by many players, including banks, to determine your exact location based on just an IP address. Apple and Google already have the information of your IP address and location, since their phones have telemetry to the mothership. So they have the most exact combination of IP address and location. And as I already said earlier, you cannot turn this off on their phones. This is why it's important to always use a VPN when using your home network. It is less important to use a VPN when not at home to evade location tracking. The reason is that the IP addresses outside of your home are not yours anyway. A cell carrier will share thousands of IP addresses within a given area, so it is not unique. The IP address is only unique at your home. So to kind of put this into another perspective, a VPN is not particularly important for location tracking if you're not on a fixed internet connection like DSL. If you're using a cell hotspot, then that is already safe from apps like the Weather Channel app. Once a third party captures your IP and location, it is pretty much impossible to avoid the link between IP address and location, and you will find yourself listed in the reverse IP lookup database. So those who are cavalier to using apps requiring location like Yelp, Craigslist, Weather Channel, and so on will likely be a victim of this. The important rule is to be cognizant of which apps use location and allow it only when needed and mostly when you're not at home. But either way, we are all victims of this when you use a Google phone or iOS phone, at least a victim of Google and Apple. Let me now expand the problem. In recent videos, I've explained that Google does additional tracking of hardware identifiers such as the IMEI or International Mobile Equipment Identity, and this identifier is being used for two-factor authentication. The issue here is that beyond IP address and location, which are critical to our identity, Google and Apple have a third identity that can absolutely determine who you are. You could use different names on YouTube or some other Google platform. You could do the same with Apple. But the fact is, they know it is the same user because of the IMEI of your mobile phone. And your phones are logged into Google with a Google ID and Apple with an Apple ID. So if you go to your computer and run a VPN to hide your location, you will see that the big tech AI will find a discrepancy. They know where your phone is. Your claim to be in a different country using the VPN will be identified as being false. The logged-in mobile device is currently on and pinging your location within 6 feet. The phone and the computer will be associated as being owned by the same party, either by location proximity, IP address, if there's no VPN, or two-factor authentication if the phone was used for that. Now, a platform like YouTube goes even beyond this. I found that if you turn off location tracking in Google Activity Controls and it doesn't have a history of your exact location, then it derives a location based on videos that you watch. If you're an immigrant from India, for example, and you're in the US, and you go to YouTube and watch a lot of videos from India, the YouTube algorithm will start assuming for marketing purposes that you are in India, and it uses this to pop ads. Now, it is not necessary to be scared of this because obviously YouTube only does this when it doesn't know your exact location. So this is their best guess. I think that if you do two-factor authentication as required now for YouTube creators, this will always point to the location of the phone running the Google app, which will always be an exact location. As I said, Google knows exactly where their phones are at all times. Here's another situation that I mentioned in another video. Google specifically tracks IP address and location from a browser if you've ever logged into Google from it. This appears to persist until you clear cookies. However, a browser cannot retrieve the IMEI, so it is not as dangerous as a system app that has privileged permissions. As you listen to my explanations here, many conflicting issues should now be apparent to all of you. It should be clear that if you have a single regular Google Android or iOS phone associated with one of your Google accounts and your phone is logged in or was logged in at some point with the IMEI, then any attempts to hide your location will fail. What I'm trying to emphasize here is that you must now be aware of cross-device tracking and how your identity and location are now based on multiple devices and not just the device you're currently working with. Tricks like not logging into your Google Android or iOS phone will not work. This is because the IMEI is known and the last user logged in is known, and the location at the time of the last login is also known. Apple particularly boasts that iPhone is privacy, and yet from what I described, what you will find is that using a regular big tech phone actually locks in your identity. Is there a solution to this? Partially. For all third-party platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Discord, and so on, yes, you can hide your identity. Typically, a VPN and just turning off location permissions is enough to limit data access to third-party platforms. Just be careful about photos. Do not allow location permissions in your photos. And better yet, use apps that scrub the EXIF metadata from photos before you post them on social media. The important thing to note here is that VPN use is extremely important at home. Otherwise, your home IP address will end up with a reverse IP lookup database and be sold. Once it is sold, your IP address will always give an exact location. To avoid Apple and Google tracking specifically, the only partial option is to use a de-Googled or Linux phone that is not linked to Google and Apple in any way. This is getting more limited since you can't even find a standard flip phone now without some Google Android being installed on it. De-Googled phones specifically do not grant access to the IMEI of the phone to Google or any other third-party app. So this is the only type of device that appears to be immune from direct cross-device tracking. Now, I said the solution is only partial. The reason for this is that Google specifically requires a two-factor authentication to be a Google app. This requirement so far applies to certain YouTube user groups like YouTube creators. They are slowly reining everyone into this requirement. What this means to a YouTube creator and whoever is subject to these new two-factor authentication rules is that we must now carry a standard Google or iOS phone. I'm forced to do this now and carry an extra phone or at least an extra SIM card. The only device that runs a Google app in my case is an iOS phone, my older iPhone 10. This phone is off most of the time unless I need it for two-factor authentication emergencies, which is very rare. It is rarely used because Google accepts texting as an option on my secondary Google phone, as long as I have the other phone with the IMEI. So the Google phones don't reveal IMEIs, no problem there. However, I'm not under any illusion that I have privacy. My iOS phone captured the location, I'm sure, for the Google app. I'm just hopeful that because Google and Apple are rivals, that the location sent is not exact. I'm guessing here. This is not an exact science, as we do not know for sure. However, I'm thinking that this is a possible approach. If you are forced to run a Google app for two-factor authentication, then you might be better off using an old iOS phone instead of a Google Android to satisfy the Google requirement. In summary, it is clear that there's no escape to the tracking until you let go of your iOS or Google Android phone as your daily driver. You either have to dump your phones, leave them off, grant extremely limited location permissions, or use different logins compared to your other devices. Or for a less limiting experience, use a de-Googled phone. No special rules are needed, but you will not be able to run Google apps. You have to find Google app substitutes. You need to always think of your PCs and laptops as related to your phones. If you use the same logins on the two types of devices, then those devices will be associated. If you have the same home IP address on all your devices, then they will be associated. If your Google Android and iOS phone is associated with other non-mobile devices, then you must presume that the exact location is also known. If you try to disengage these associated identities in different devices, understand that the AI may not trust you initially. You may have to build a pattern for them to believe that you really did change location or IP address. The platform will likely give you lots of captcha codes until they are satisfied that this is a long-term change. So old solutions are no longer as effective. Big tech is fighting back. You might think that for some of you not willing to make moves to hide your location or IP address, that there's no solution for you and I will just depress you. If the data is already known, such as in my case where my YouTube channel is tied to my iPhone running a Google app, the solution is disinformation. I will discuss that in later videos. But fortunately, there are always answers. This video is focusing on obscuring identities. If you cannot do that, then you have to obscure the actual data captured. We will discuss that next time. I'm on the platform Odyssey.com. I'm now one of the top creators on there. Just for insurance, in case I get deplatformed, please follow me there using the link in the description. Your engagement with this channel in the form of comments, likes, and especially subscriptions is very important to me. This channel grows because of you. So I hope you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, and I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching and see you next time.